When a famous comedy actor walked onto a television set expecting a friendly conversation, he had no idea the day would turn into one of the most uncomfortable moments in TV history. Rowan Atkinson, known worldwide for making millions of people laugh, arrived at the studio that afternoon ready for a normal interview. What happened instead shocked everyone watching. The show had 4 hosts that day. Denise Welch was leading the interview, joined by Nadia Salha, Kay Adams, and Janet Street. Porter, when Rowan first sat down, everything seemed fine. The cameras started rolling and everyone was smiling. It looked like it would be a pleasant chat about his career and new projects. Denise started the conversation cheerfully. She told Rowan how thrilled they were to have him on the show and asked what brought him there. Rowan began explaining that he was working on an exciting new project and thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about it with the audience. But before he could finish his answer, Denise interrupted him. She said she wanted to ask him something that had been on her mind. She asked if he ever wondered whether people took him seriously as an actor, considering he had spent his whole career playing silly characters and bumbling fools. The studio suddenly got quiet. Rowan looked surprised but stayed calm. He explained that the characters he created connected with people because they found something real in them. He said comedy is serious work and he had always treated it with dedication. Denise laughed, but it was not a friendly laugh. She questioned how comedy could be serious craft when all he did was pull funny faces for a living. She even said her children could do that. The other hosts started looking uncomfortable. Nadia shifted in her seat. Kay looked down at her notes. Janet raised her eyebrows. The whole atmosphere in the room had changed. Rowan took a deep breath and tried to stay professional. He explained that physical comedy requires perfect timing, precision, and many years of practice. It is not as simple as it looks. Denise dismissed this with a wave of her hand. She said he was acting like he performed Shakespeare when really he was just a funny face man. She told him to be honest about what he really did. Nadia tried to help by jumping in quickly. She said what made Rowan's work so brilliant was how universal it was. People all over the world could enjoy it without needing to understand any dialogue. She said that was truly special. Rowan smiled at her gratefully and thanked her. He said creating something that goes beyond language and culture had always been his goal. But Denise was not finished. She leaned forward again and her voice got sharper. She said she found it interesting that he had been doing the same thing for decades, the same silly walks, the same rubber face. She asked if he did not think it was time to grow up. The audience gasped out loud. Even the other hosts looked shocked. Kay spoke up and said she did not think that was fair. She pointed out that Rowan had an incredible career with many different types of performances. Denise turned to Kay looking annoyed. She said she was just asking questions their viewers wanted answered and nobody else seemed willing to be honest with him. Rowan sat up straighter in his chair. His voice stayed calm but became firmer. He said he appreciated honesty but did not appreciate disrespect. He had come in good faith to have a conversation, not to be insulted. Denise rolled her eyes dramatically. She said the famous actor could not handle straight talk. This was exactly what she was talking about. She said he lived in a bubble where everyone told him how wonderful he was. Janet finally spoke up, saying this was getting ridiculous because he was their guest. Rowan gently held up his hand toward Janet, showing he could handle it himself. He looked directly at Denise and told her he had been performing for over 40 years. He had faced critics, harsh reviews, and difficult audiences, but he always maintained respect for others and expected the same back. What she was doing was not honest journalism or even good television. It was simply rude. The other hosts nodded in agreement. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Denise laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. She said she was being real and maybe he was just too sensitive. Maybe that was the problem with celebrities these days. They could not handle anyone questioning them. Rowan shook his head slowly. He explained there was a difference between questioning someone and belittling them. She had done nothing but mock his career since he sat down. She had dismissed decades of work with careless comments. She had interrupted him repeatedly and now she was saying he was too sensitive for pointing out her behavior. Nadia reached over and touched Rowan's arm supportively. She said he was absolutely right and she was sorry this had happened. Kay nodded and said this was supposed to celebrate his work, not attack it. Denise threw her hands up and said it was unbelievable. She claimed she was trying to have a real conversation and everyone was ganging up on her. If they all wanted to worship at his feet, they could go ahead. Rowan stayed composed with a steady voice. He said nobody was asking for worship, he was asking for basic respect. The same respect he had shown her and everyone else that day. A woman in the audience called out that they loved Rowan. Several others applauded in agreement. This show of support seemed to make Denise even more defensive. Denise snapped back that now the audience was getting involved. This was exactly what she was talking about. Nobody wanted to have real conversations anymore. Everyone just wanted to tell famous people how great they were. Rowan looked at her with genuine confusion. He asked what would satisfy her. What did she actually want from this conversation? It seemed like she had already decided what she thought about him no matter what he said. Denise threw up her hands again. She said she wanted honesty. She wanted him to admit that maybe he had been coasting on the same act for years. That maybe he was not the untouchable genius everyone pretended he was. The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members stopped working to watch. This had crossed from uncomfortable into truly shocking territory. Nadia put her face in her hands. Kay looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Janet stared at Denise with open disbelief. Rowan took a slow, deep breath. When he spoke, his voice was calm but had steel underneath. He said he had never claimed to be untouchable or a genius. He was simply a performer who dedicated his life to his craft. He worked hard, studied comedy, and tried to bring entertainment to people. If that was coasting to her, they had very different definitions of the word. He continued by asking what this was really about. This level of hostility seemed personal. Had he done something to offend her specifically? If so, he was not aware of it and would appreciate her telling him directly instead of attacking him on air. Denise seemed taken aback by the direct question. She stammered slightly and said it was not personal. She just thought someone needed to ask these questions. Everyone was always so nice to celebrities and someone had to be willing to challenge them. Kay could not stay quiet anymore. Her voice was sharp as she said challenging someone and being needlessly cruel were two different things. She told Denise she had not asked a single meaningful question. She had just made personal attacks dressed up as honesty. Nadia lifted her head from her hands and looked directly at Denise. She said she had to agree with Kay. This was not what they did. This was not who they were. Rowan came in good faith and had been treated terribly from the moment he sat down. She said she was embarrassed. Janet added her voice. She told Denise that if she wanted honesty, here was some honesty. She was being a bully. That was what this was. She was bullying their guest on live television and trying to justify it as journalism or entertainment. It was neither. It was just mean. The audience erupted in applause. The support for Rowan and condemnation of Denise's behavior was overwhelming. People were nodding vigorously in agreement. Denise looked around at her fellow hosts, the audience, and the crew. She was completely isolated. But instead of backing down, she doubled down one more time. She said if everyone wanted to cuddle him, they could go ahead. But they should not pretend she was the villain for asking tough questions. Rowan shook his head slowly. The sadness in his expression was clear. He said she kept calling them tough questions, but they were not questions at all. They were statements. Negative statements about him and his work. There was nothing tough about being rude. Any child could do that. Denise leaned back in her chair with crossed arms. She said if he did not like the questions, maybe he should not come on talk shows. This was what they did. They asked tough questions. Janet interrupted sharply. She said these were not tough questions. These were insulting comments disguised as questions. There was a difference. The tension in the studio was unbearable. The producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. The audience sat frozen watching this disaster unfold in real time. Rowan stood up slowly. He removed his microphone with careful, deliberate movements. He said he thought it was best if he left now. He thanked Nadia, Kate, and Janet for their kindness and wished them all the best. Denise scoffed and said he was just going to walk out. How professional. Rowan paused and turned back to face her. His expression was not angry, just sad and disappointed. He said walking away from disrespect was one of the most professional things a person could do. He had spent his entire life treating people with dignity. He would not stay somewhere where that was not returned. The other three hosts looked mortified. Nadia had tears in her eyes. Kay shook her head in disbelief. Janet stared at Denise with barely concealed anger. Denise seemed to finally realize she had gone too far. Her face turned red. She said wait, she did not mean to, but Rowan had already turned away. He walked off the set with his head held high, leaving behind a stunned studio. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the awkward silence that followed. Kay finally broke the silence. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. She said that was completely unnecessary. Rowan Atkinson was a legend in entertainment and did not deserve any of that. Nadia wiped her eyes and said she could not believe what just happened. They invited him as a guest and he was treated horribly. She felt terrible. Janet did not hold back. She turned to Denise directly and said that was completely out of line. She had crossed every line there was. What was she thinking? Denise tried to defend herself, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. She said she was just trying to push the conversation somewhere interesting. She did not think he would be so sensitive about it. Kay shook her head firmly. She said no, Denise was not pushing anything interesting. She was being deliberately provocative and disrespectful. There was no excuse for it. The audience began to murmur. Some people were shaking their heads in disapproval. Others were whispering to each other. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Nadia addressed the audience directly. She wanted to apologize on behalf of all of them. Rowan came in good faith and was not treated the way a guest should be treated. That was not what the show was supposed to be about. The audience applauded Nadia's words. It was clear where their sympathies were. After the show ended, the audience left quietly. Usually there was excited chatter after a taping, but that day people seemed shocked and uncomfortable. They had witnessed something they never expected to see. The crew began breaking down the set in silence. Everyone knew they had just witnessed one of the most uncomfortable moments in the show's history. Denise sat alone in the dressing room afterward. The reality of what happened was finally sinking in. She had thought she would conduct a memorable interview. She had succeeded, but not in the way she intended. The other hosts left without saying much to her. The cold shoulder was deliberate and clear. Later, the producers called Denise into their office. The atmosphere was cold and professional. They told her what happened was completely unacceptable. Rowan Atkinson was an internationally respected performer. They had invited him as their guest, and he was subjected to what could only be described as an attack. They had already received dozens of complaints and their social media was exploding with criticism. This was a public relations nightmare. The incident became one of those moments people reference when talking about interviews gone wrong. A cautionary tale about the importance of treating guests with respect, no matter how confident a host might feel. For Rowan, the day had been frustrating and disappointing. But he had handled it the only way he knew how, with dignity and grace. After decades in the public eye, he had learned that the best response to disrespect is not anger. It is simply to walk away and maintain your dignity. In the end, the incident was not remembered as bold or provocative television. It was remembered as a lesson in how not to treat a guest and what grace under pressure truly looks like. Rowan Atkinson had walked into that studio as a legend. Despite someone's best efforts to diminish him, he walked out as one too. His reputation remained intact, even enhanced by the way he handled an impossible situation. He showed that true professionalism means knowing when to stand up for yourself and when to simply walk away.